Since the time of the financial crisis, which amazingly is 16 years ago, I've been talking about a particularly accurate indicator of the US economy, an indicator which I believe is actually far more important than GDP in telling us what's actually happening in the US economy. And that's the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator. The Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator was originally created, I think last century, and it was the instrument used to say when the economy, the US economy, was actually in recession. It was the official instrument that was used. It's not any longer, but it's still very accurate and published by the Chicago Federal Reserve every month. It's actually measures more things than GDP. There's 85 different components which are measured in the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator, and those include production measures, including manufacturing production. They include sales orders and inventories, employment, and personal consumption and housing. So what we do is we actually show, and before the pandemic, we were showing for a number of years a model of the US economy based on the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator. And what we discovered was that we could determine with an accuracy of about 78% the year-on-year rate of change of GDP in the US economy. So the rate of change of that, we found we could forecast that with a lead of about a quarter, but from the 3-month moving average of the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator, and explain it with 98% accuracy. So what we show you first is a chart of that model from the beginning of the century up until the beginning of the pandemic and the period since. And what you'll see is that it's extremely accurate in telling us what's actually happening in GDP a quarter ahead up until the pandemic. And then there are beginning of really big swings in GDP, which seem to have nothing to do with what the fundamentals of the economy are as shown in the model based on the Chicago Fed. Now, if we look at the second slide and look at those variations more closely, what we see is that at the beginning of the pandemic, that output actually falls far more dramatically than our forecast based on the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator. That's really simply because the economy was shut down. Then what happens after that is GDP swings dramatically and continues to go up dramatically well after our leading indicator, the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator, has peaked out. And what's actually happening there is the accumulation of inventories. And this is what is known or remembered as the well-known supply side effects. So that when the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator kicks up in the recovery of the pandemic, that generates demand, but that increase in demand is so strong, it takes a long time for the economy to create all of the goods and services that are needed. And so the swing in GDP is later and higher than what would be forecast by the model. But what's actually happening as we continue through 22 and 23 is those swings are slowing down and getting closer to our model. We saw a swing up of US GDP year-on-year growth for the year to September of 3.3%. But we think that's now going to turn over and fall because our model, based on the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator, says that for the full year, growth in the US economy should be 1.8%. That is to say, the year-on-year rate of growth in the US economy, 1.8%. Now, the forecast by the Blue Ribbon Consensus is for 2024 is for growth in the US economy to be 1.5%. So that's just below where we see our model at 1.8% coming into the year. So when we look at our model of the US economy based on the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator, we find that the swings of actual GDP are getting closer and closer to what our model forecasts. So we think that going forward from here, we'll be able to get very good, accurate forecasts again of what's happening by one of the oldest and more admired by economists and broader measures of what's actually happening in the US economy, the Chicago Fed National Activity Indicator.